anybody who doesn't manage to make it with us tonight, and it will be available on our YouTube channel. I will probably upload it tomorrow. So if you want to go back and watch it again, then you can do that. Or as I said, if anybody you know who wanted to come along tonight hasn't managed to make it, you can direct them there. I would normally say at this point that we should keep our mics off, but given that there aren't many people here, I don't suppose there's any great need for people to keep their mics off. All I would say is, if you do start getting a lot of noise in the background wherever you are, that you keep an eye on that and turn the mics off for yourself. If you want to, you can post any general questions while Giles is talking in the chat, and then we can deal with those afterwards. And then once Giles has finished his talk to us, then I'll throw it open to sort of more general questions and chit chat and observations after. So with that, Giles, it's over to you.
Well, that's very kind, and good evening, everyone, and thank you for supporting this. This evening is less a talk and more an ask, if I may. I have just launched, actually I launched on the 4th of September, so it's not quite just, but I have launched my police precept consultation to decide what the police precepts should be for financial year 24-25. It's going to run until the 20th of November, and I'm really keen that as many people as possible take part. I'm going about it in a very different way this year, because previously we've waited to get all the firm information from the government, and given that they normally don't announce the autumn statement until late October, beginning of November, this year it's the 20th of November, and then the Home Office doesn't announce its allocations until the second week of December, that's rather forced us into a very short 2-week consultation in January. And as you'll appreciate, January is not the best time of year to discuss anything to do with money, because we're all broke after a really good Christmas, and it's a pretty dark and miserable month. And the last thing people want to do is to listen or talk to me about whether they should pay more tax. But it's really important to me, as the public's representative in policing, to know the public's views. And so this year, I'm going out for 12 weeks. I'm going out with more generic questions, and I'm canvassing as many views as possible so that when I get the firm detail, I know what the public's priorities are, and I know whether they're prepared to pay more for policing or less for policing. And I can then come to a view in January as to what I should recommend when I go to the police and crime panel, who are, if you like, the check and balance on what I do. Let me now sort of talk a little bit about the money situation. Money in policing is difficult. If you go right back to 2010, when austerity began, Norfolk Constabulary was set a target over 10 years to reduce the annual policing budget by £42 million a year. That was a 20% cut. That was achieved by 2020. At the same time, we also absorbed £178 million of aggregated inflation and other cost pressures. We had a slight glimmer of hope at the time that Boris Johnson was elected, announced he was going to put lots more money into policing, announced that we were going to have 20,000 more police officers. But you're all just as well aware as I am as to the political turbulence that's taken place. And where we're at now is a situation that was announced on the 27th of October 2021 by Rishi Sunak as Chancellor, that dates it, when he stood up at the dispatch box and announced the Comprehensive Spending Review Settlement 2021 for the next 3 years. We're currently in year 2 of that settlement, and the precept consultation that I'm talking about relates to year 3. The problem with that settlement is that Rishi at the dispatch box talked about inflation being a little bit high at 3.1%, the possibility that it might just get to 4%, but it would very definitely come down to the Bank of England's target of 2% within 2 to 3 months. And of course, that did not happen. So we're having to absorb all the inflation pressures that are going on. And there's also a lot of other pressures. Pay last year was a 5% pay award, agreed nationally. The Treasury didn't fund any of it. The Home Office found 1%. I had to find the other 4%. That was a £6 million in-year cost pressure. This year, the pay rise was 7%. The Home Office found a little bit of it. The Treasury found a little bit of it. The Home Office found most of it, and I'm only having to find 300,000 in year, but I'm having to find £1 million next year as an in-year cost pressure. And I could go on with cost pressures, but where I'm at is that the modelling for next year shows that we have a £6.9 million budget gap. If, and I emphasize it's an if, because I haven't made any decisions yet, but if I was to go to the full extent of my precepting threshold, that would be £10 on a Band D property and a sliding scale for other properties. That would bring in £3 million and would reduce the the cost gap to the budget gap. Let me correct myself again. The budget gap to 3.9 million. Last year, when I presented the proposals, it was on the basis that we could sustain the then current policing service, albeit there would be a bit of belt tightening. This year, it is almost certain that I will be asking for, let's say, £10, but I will then be announcing when I actually make my decision that the police are having to make significant cuts, i.e. that there will be penalties to services. What those cuts are, we don't yet know. I have asked the Chief Constable to do a very detailed costing exercise, and I'm then going to climb all over that in my scrutiny role, because I sense that some of the things that he might want to put up as sacrificial lambs are things that I, as the public's representative, might say, no, I don't think that's the right call. And that's very much my role. But at the end of the day, this year, something has to give. We can no longer absorb it. One detail I haven't yet mentioned, which I should throw in, is that we're currently running at a £1.3 million overspend for the current financial year. And if we don't make that up in year, we're going to have to absorb that as well on top of the rest. So this is going to be a very difficult spending round. And lots of people, when they do the comments, make comments like, it should all come from central government. Well, that would be lovely, and I agree that perhaps it should. But if I tell you that 54% of the police budget comes from the Treasury via the Home Office, the remaining 46% comes from the households of Norfolk through the precept, you'll realise that the precept is part of the core budget. I don't think we will get a significant markup on the Home Office side this year. Last year, the budget increase was, I think off the top of my head, 7.8 million. 1.9 million came from the Home Office, and that was basically tied into the police uplift programme. And the government announced that I would be raising the precepts and raising 5.5 million accordingly, which was good of them, as I hadn't at that point gone out to consult the households who I represent. But you will see that the government rather regards the precepts as part of core funding, and they think they control it. And that's a battle that, you know, we have to contend with. So what we're really saying in this is that some very harsh decisions are going to have to be made. And therefore, what I'm asking, instead of coming out as I've done in previous years and said, £10 or £15, that's my recommendation, what do you think, support it or not? I'm coming out this year saying, I don't know, but in anticipation that it will probably have to go up, will you prioritise against the 6 pillars of the police and crime plan, what is important to you? And particularly to make sure we don't miss anything, make any additional comments in the comments box on the online form. And in that way, I hope I will get a broad cross-section of views from across the county. We normally, in the 2-week exercise, get about 800 responses. We've already got, I think at this morning's count, 504 responses. we've got 960,000 people in Norfolk, so I would love to get a much bigger sample so that I can be clear that I've got a genuine voice from Norfolk and I understand what that voice is made up of. Because otherwise it leaves me sort of flying solo, which is not always helpful. So I come back to the beginning after that fairly lengthy ramble, which I hope made sense, and say I'm really grateful the NALC's support in getting the word out through every parish council, every town council, every other council, and any other audiences you're involved in to get people to engage. The questionnaire can be found online on the PCC's website. If you just Google PCC Norfolk, you'll find it, and there's a signpost from the front page. If you need paper copies, please get in touch with the office and ask them if they can be done. One of the other things that we have done this time, which we've not been able to do in the past, is that we've been able to do a lot more work on accessible versions for the various diverse communities who can't use a normal online approach. And so they are not disadvantaged this time, which I'm afraid they were on previous occasions, and that's a lesson that we've learned. I could go on for a while longer, but probably rather than me talking at you, it'd be better for you to ask me questions and for me to address those points that you're keen to look at.
Okay, well, there's an open invitation. I've got one question for you, Giles, to get the ball rolling. Are there any areas of sort of crime and criminal behaviour and associated issues that have either significantly increased or decreased in recent years? I suppose what I'm saying is, what are the trends in terms of the pressures on the police force to continue delivering?
Crime we're in a pretty good place crime-wise. I mean, we have, for example, the lowest burglary rate in the country. We're doing much better on rural crime than we ever have done before. But where the police are under real pressure is that pre-pandemic, they would respond to 250 999 calls in a 24-hour day. This year, that number has been above 600, has spiked beyond 700, and on occasions has spiked beyond 800. So one of the great problems the constabulary has is that where their bread and butter should really be community policing, they are increasingly being drawn into response policing. And as a result of that, they've got a growing backlog of follow-ups to issues that they should be following up more quickly, simply because there's always something new coming around the corner and they're having to prioritize. So at the moment, the constabulary is running hot. And that's the greatest issue.
And have those calls to the 999 service, have they sort of broadly remained the same in terms of the type of calls, or have you noticed a significant shift in the type of requests that are going through to 999?
That's an operational question I can't answer off the top of my head. It is a question I've asked the Chief Constable, and he's doing some statistical work on it together with 101, which is a separate issue in this context, but it's something we're also looking at, trying to identify whether there's anything else we can do differently to make better use of our resource. On that subject, we are looking very carefully at police activity, and you may have seen in the media one initiative, which is Right Care, Right Person, where we are stepping back where we can from mental health issues, because mental health should be a health duty of care. Now, to give you some sort of numbers on that, last year we got 27,000 calls about mental health issues, roughly 75 a day. The constabulary attended 70% of those calls. What we're going to try and do is reduce attendance to about 40%. So 30% were ruled as part of the sort of threat assessment, the risk assessment when the call came in, as not requiring police support. We're going to try and reduce that by a further 30%, and that will mainly be concerns for welfare. The police will always have a statutory obligation to attend if there is a risk to life or a risk to serious harm. So that's the remaining 40% where they'll continue to attend. But to give you two examples of incidents which we have attended up till now, but which we won't attend in future. One, a hospital ward calling the police saying someone with dementia has wandered off the ward. Will you please come and look for him? We did attend. The person was found in the cafe at the front door of the Norfolk and Norwich. We wouldn't attend in future because there's no immediate threat to risk of life and limb. The patient is thought still to be on hospital premises. Hospital staff, probably hospital security staff, should fulfill that role. It shouldn't be a police function. Another one was a mental health patient on day release, didn't return, and 24 hours later, we were rung up, the police were rung up and were told, we now know where this person is, he's with their girlfriend, will you go round and pick them up? We did attend. It took a couple of hours to talk that person out the house because the police have no right to just crash into a house and arrest someone, put them in a car and take them away. You need a Section 135 warrant to do that. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, looking forward, that is one we would not attend because there is no immediate threat to life or harm. And actually, that would be the mental health authorities, mental health trusts' duty of care. But if someone was going to jump off a motorway bridge or a bridge on the A11, that's a clear risk, immediate risk of life, and the police will be there like a shot, absolutely. But the plus side is that 30% of calls we will no longer attend should give us a return of 40 officer hours per day to recycle back into visible policing. It doesn't save us on the money. These are existing assets that we're already paying for, but they won't be sitting in A&E with a patient who we're waiting to have a psychiatric assessment. They'll be back out on the streets having dropped off with the NHS.
Okay.
Giles, I picked up earlier on when you were talking about precept, you indicated somewhere in the region of £10. About 2 minutes later, £10 became £10 to £15. It moved very quickly.
That's history.
Perhaps that's the privilege you have.
Yeah, not at all. And thank you for picking that up and challenging it, because that's woolly. That's me being woolly. Normally, my statutory threshold is 2%, and if I want to go above 2%, I have to go to a local referendum. And so historically, unless the government has increased the threshold, we have stuck normally at a maximum of 1.99, whatever that translates into in terms of pounds, shillings and pence, and it's always calculated at band D. When Rishi Sunak stood at the dispatch box on the 27th of October 2021, he raised the threshold £10, so not a percentage figure, a flat £10 at band D for the 3 years of the comprehensive spending review settlement. Last year, and this is what I was thinking of when I muddied the water, last year on the 12th of December, the policing minister suddenly announced out of a clear blue sky that because we were under pressure financially, we could go to £15. And you will recall that I did go to £15 at band D last year. This year, the threshold is £10. I am not going to go to a local referendum. Who's going to vote for it? You know, let's not waste everybody's time and the money that goes with it. If on or about the 12th of December, when we get the figures from the Home Office, they say, oh, and by the way, you can go to £15. Well, of course, I would have to look at that because of the issues I discussed. But my expectation and what I'm saying to the constabulary at the moment is I will stick at £10, because I'm also mindful as the public's elected representative that while I sit in my ivory tower, and it doesn't sound a great deal, given all the other pressures on households, you know, cost of living, mortgages, water, you name it, you know, we all know what they are because we're all householders ourselves. Would it be right? And one of my functions is to address issues that lead to crime. And if I force more people into that grey area where they haven't got enough to put food on their table, then I'm forcing more people to go out and perhaps do silly things to put food on their table. And that would be wrong. But it's a really difficult balancing act. And this is why, again, coming back to the Precept, it's so important to have your engagement and the engagement of everybody that's prepared to fill in the questionnaire.
I think we all have problems with Precept. I mean, for the last year, we didn't raise anything in Wroxham, but without question, because of all our costs are also going up, we're going to have to consider raising it for next year. Now, that together with all the other increases from Broadland and so on and so forth, that's going to be quite a penalty as far as Bandee is concerned.
I agree, and part of my consultation is to talk to the county council, all 7 of the district councils. I won't go below that because I can't. I wouldn't have the capacity to go further than that. But I get a view as to what they're going to do, so that I know when it's all aggravated up what it looks like as an overall increase on the bill, and that's part of my thinking.
Thank you.
Yeah, we in Walcott we actually did do exactly the same. We didn't put any addition on our precept. So again, as you say, we're going to have to put our precept up, which means we're playing catch up. So then it will make it more difficult because it'll look like theirs has jumped quite considerably next year, like yourselves in Wroxham, when all we're doing, because we held it back as far as the parish was concerned, and to actually catch up. My concern is that in a meeting we had last week, Giles, with regard to speeding in the community, when we were discussing all that, you were talking about another issue which was becoming more prevalent in rural communities, which mainly was in the home, rape and various other things. If you are putting it up that much and having that many more hours, is the response in the rural areas on that side of things going to become quicker?
Again, it's an operational question. I mean, the response time in the rural areas is set at 20 minutes for a 999 call. It's 9 minutes in the urban areas. That is driven by national standards, first of all, and by geography. And one of the things we do when we're locating police stations is we look very carefully at where we can reach from a new police station and whether a police building gives us that reach. The issue we have with 999s is that if all our officers are already responding to 999s, where is the first available unit to respond? And if you're in Wroxham and that available unit is in Thetford, we haven't just got the response time, the 20-minute response time, you've simply got the transit time. And so that's a juggling act, an operational juggling act for the control room superintendent to get whoever it is there at the fastest time. And what has been happening is that the control room have been ringing units on the ground who are already attending a 999 call saying, sorry, drop that, move to this one, it's a higher priority. And that usually depends on whether there's casualties on the ground or the risk of casualties because of the nature of the incident. So there is a lot of work going on that. Where I think you will see reductions are in specific capabilities, and I'm not going to speculate on those at the moment, because what I've asked the Chief Constable to do is to look at capabilities and cost them, so that if he says we're going to take, I'll be frivolous in my example, if we're going to take the underwater basket weaving capability out of Norfolk Constabulary, it comes with a price tag, and we know that that will no longer exist on the North Coast, and it will be a specific issue with a measurable price tag with measurable penalties. What I don't think we can do any longer is salami slice the community policing capabilities. And what I'm very keen to do is to protect the community policing capability. So we're going to be looking at other things. Now, there are one or two things, and you mentioned the rural speeding meeting that we had up at North Walsham. Chief Constable and I have already had a conversation since that meeting, and we are costing, notwithstanding the budgetary pressures, we are costing the purchase of more camera safety vans. and identifying how we can fund them outside the police budget. So there's a lot of parallel strands to this to actually finesse the service, because the last thing I want to do is to turn around and say to people, you're just never going to see a police officer because we can't afford to send them out to your neck of the woods. That'd be completely wrong. But there may be certain functions. I mean, I was at a meeting this afternoon where we were looking at the policing of the livestock market at Norwich. And every second Saturday, the police have to put 15 officers out to deal with half a dozen to a dozen protesters. Is there a different way of doing that? And we were discussing with Norwich City Council and with other partners whether they would be able to take on that function with marshals that they employ, while the police simply provide a police presence, so that if there is a need to arrest, there is a police officer present. That's how we police Carrow Road and the football ground. The Canaries basically pay for their own marshals, and there's a very small police presence. But what that probably means that in the case of the livestock market is I take the police cover from 15, let's say, down to 12. Or sorry, take it down from 15 to 3, take 12 out and leave 3 behind. That's a significant cut in capability from a policing perspective, but we backfill it with an alternative means of doing business. What I'm really loath to do, because everyone will say that their particular function is important, is to cut something and not backfill in some way. But there may yet be some harsh decisions of that ilk.
No, I understand that. It's just that obviously we have to put the argument forward that because we have held back the money from the councils from last year, we're going to have a double jump in effect, or at least a fair amount of jump, plus a £10 or whatever from the policing. And so we've got to substantiate that to the parishioners, really, and tell them that this is the reason why this is happening.
I'm afraid I can't enter the debates about your precept. I can only talk about mine.
Yeah, absolutely.
One size fits all across all 540 parishes of Norfolk. So I hear your point, and you're not the only parish in that circumstance. I mean, there were 2 district councils last year that froze council tax, and I think are in a similar position because they've now got to take a step up. I get that, and I'll take that into account in the bigger picture, but I'm afraid your precept decisions will have to be yours. I've got enough weight here.
Yes, no, I understand that.
Yeah, I think we can all see that there's pressures coming from every single level of local government, and all of the people whose precepts, whose budgets are rolled up in those bills that go out to people in sort of March time, are rolled up there. And you know, Giles, you know, the PCC office, the police is only one element of that, and people are going to see significant jumps in their bills. I think the question I take it that Giles is asking is, well, if there has to be some give, where should the give be? What sorts of things should he be doing? Should he be looking at?
Giles,
that's the purpose of asking you to put things in priority, because if something consistently is the bottom priority, then we know that's an area in which the public would accept a degree of risk.
Giles, I appreciate resources are a problem for you, but I think if you look at Wroxham in this particular instance, we have Houghton on the other side of the river from us. So we have Houghton, who's North Norfolk. We have Wroxham, that's Broadlands, and right in the middle, we've got the Broads Authority. And Houghton has a police office, but our own beat manager works from the new Broadland headquarters. He doesn't work from the offices that's just across the river. So we've got beat managers that take the north side of the river, and we've got a beat manager that's miles away in Broadland that looks after Wroxham. So coverage becomes somewhat limited in terms of the 2 areas, particularly ours.
That's an operational policing matter, and I can't influence that. That will be something that if there is concern, you ask your beat manager if you can have a conversation with your local superintendent. Now, I suspect that has more to do with the fact the beat manager is covering more than one parish. I mean, there's
most certainly, yeah.
in the Cromer area who covers 28 parishes.
Yeah.
a large proportion of the beat managers are covering more than one. We have 87 beat managers and 540 parishes. You can immediately see that they're covering more. And most of the beat managers have other responsibilities as well. So, you know, it's an interesting thing that there are 1,000, I think the figure yesterday was 1,873 police officers in Norfolk. If I go back to 2010, we had 1,812 plus 281 police community support officers. So we're 250 pairs of boots down on where we were in 2010. During that time, the population has grown by 9%, 10%. But more importantly, the nature of crime, the demand on policing has grown exponentially. 999s at 10% a year. So we're being stretched. And then if you divide those 1,873 officers up into shifts to provide 24/7 52 cover, there are probably only about 200, 250 officers on duty at a time. Take out the specialists, you're probably down to less than 100 officers doing routine beat work if they're not responding to 999s.
I fully understand the reasons. I think the thing is, it takes us back to the precept that when we put this to the residents, they want to know what they're getting value for money. And when we explain to them what I've just mentioned to you, they find that very difficult to accept.
And I go back to the point that most of our residents in Norfolk believe that central government pays for policing and that the precept is an optional extra. And I would strongly emphasize the point that the precept is a core part of policing. Policing costs more now, and the costs keep going up for all sorts of bizarre reasons. I could have gone on in my list of examples. And government is not putting the money up. So we have the choice of reducing the police service or asking residents to pay more. And it is a choice. If they're not prepared to pay more, then we will have to cut. The difficulty I'm in this year, coming back to that point, is that we're in a particularly difficult year, that we may be in a catch-22 where we ask for more and still have to cut. But the more we can find, the less pain that we'll have to bear.
I think, Giles, and I speak, I think for most people, that your top priorities obviously are RTAs, rapes, assaults, and then coming down thefts, and then possibly, as you say, your road issues like we were talking about last week. You can use other methods the majority of the time, and then yet education you can backfill somewhat as well, and not use your officers so much on the education side and use other means for that as well.
We're already doing a lot of that, and yes, there will be more of that done. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm actually just looking at your 6 pillars here and your explanation of it on your website, Giles. And there's I think there's probably a lot of things that are captured under those 6 headings that people wouldn't immediately identify as necessarily priorities for the police service. And I suppose what I'm saying is that there's an issue about making sure people do know what the broad range of sort of aims and objectives of the police service in Norfolk. And in terms of feeding back, it's important that as many people as possible make their views known. And I'm making the assumption that actually, if you had lots of feedback that said that the government should be doing more, there should be more coming in directly from the Treasury and what have you, that would whilst it might not completely cause the Treasury to open the coffers and suddenly pour lots of Norfolk, it certainly can't do any harm to have some evidence from directly from the people affected by the service to take back to central government and say, look, this is what I'm hearing as part of my consultation. That's why it's important for as many people as possible to go in and make their views known.
And we are at an interesting moment. I sit here, I happen to have been elected as a Conservative. Now, I'm not a particularly political animal, and while I recognise that election is a political process, I try and do the job, certainly when I'm outward facing, politically neutral, to the extent I've asked Radio Norfolk to stop introducing me as Norfolk's Conservative police and crime, because I serve all communities regardless of political colour. But notwithstanding the fact I wear a blue tie, we are heading towards the general election, you all see the polls just as I see the polls. What's interesting is that in 2018, the National Audit Office produced a scathing report about the Home Office's lack of understanding of what policing costs and how it is funded and how that money is then spent. And the then chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee, one Yvette Cooper, wrote an excoriating report on behalf of the Home Affairs Select Committee to the Home Secretary of the day saying, get a grip. She is, of course, Yvette Cooper is, of course, the Shadow Home Secretary. And I already have a letter in draft very politely saying, you said this when you were the Shadow Home Secretary / Chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee, would very much welcome a conversation about funding in Norfolk, because actually, as you're new to this game, it'd be really good if we could influence the new Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, presumably, to revisit the whole of the 2018 NAO report and the whole model of funding for policing. Now, that's not going to happen instantly. I don't know when the election will be. It could be May the 2nd. It could be October the 10th or 24th. Those are the dates that seem to be being bandied about. And it will then take time for whoever gets in to get their feet under their respective tables and decide how they're going to go forward. But if I'm successful at being re-elected on May the 2nd next year, I would like to think we would have a new funding model for the next comprehensive spending review period. And as I mentioned earlier on, we're going into year 3. So by the time we get to financial year 25-26, I would hope we would have a different settlement, which would lean back more in favour towards government funding a greater proportion of that core budget.
Right. Have we got any more observations or questions for Giles? Right. Okay. What I would say is Faye has posted in the chat the link to the consultation where you can make observations online. I presume it will be possible for people to send observations into your office by other means, Giles. I will make sure that link is posted on our website, so anybody will be able to access that link directly through, and it will be available to anybody who hasn't been here tonight, or indeed to people here tonight, if you want to use that in whatever way possible. And by all means, circulate that link to as many people as possible to get them to dial in.
People can send stuff in independently, but I'd add a note of caution. I obviously get an inbox, and there is a risk that views would get stuck in the inbox rather than feed into this consultation. If we got a response from every single person in the county, and I appreciate we're not going to get that, and everybody used it as a different format, it would be very difficult to collate and analyse that response. So where possible, it'd be really helpful if they could fill in the question.
Use the link,
in that usable format. And as an adjunct on that, if people question the back page, which is all about gender and ethnicity and orientation and faith and so on, they might think I've gone horribly woke. That's not the purpose of those questions. It's not to be probing, and the survey is anonymous. But what that tells me is what sample of the population we've got, because obviously we've got the 2021 census that tells us what the demographic is, what the ethnicity is, and so on. And if we find that everyone responds is a pensioner over the age of 65, we'll know we've only heard one voice. And that will be part of my consideration as well. I want to get as broad a cross-section of Norfolk's communities filling in this, so I hear every voice if possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Giles, just a question slightly off on that. I noticed on the news this morning that there was a lot of fear about what has been happening in the Middle East and the kickback in this country about what may happen to various groups within this country. That's going to directly impact on the police and the policing as well, isn't it?
Yes, the reason I was a little late arriving was because there are a series of meetings in progress at the moment. I got Mark Stokes, my chief executive, to go to one at past with the policing minister, where we're talking about exactly that. We're in an interesting, very interesting scenario here in this country, it's a horrific scenario for both sides in the Middle East. And it's going to get worse and then far worse, I sense, before it gets better. And that's terrible. In this country, we're great believers in free speech. So, you know, I respect the fact that people might have views that are supportive of Israel or might have views that are supportive of Palestine. Where we must draw a line, though, is where people support Hamas specifically, because that is a prescribed terrorist organization in this country. And what we are trying to sort out within policing is how we respond to specifically Hamas support without creating a major public order problem. Now, I'm hopeful that it's not going to be an issue in Norfolk. The early engagement through the independent advisory group you're familiar with, through the police directly with the communities, is that while there's a degree of nervousness, there have been no issues so far. I'm more worried about far left and far right using this for their own purposes, and totally different groups getting involved from those that perhaps could argue they have a direct interest. And we're looking at that as well. It's a really delicate situation, and we've got to get it right and not aggravate it.
Yeah.
I have expressed a view to the Chief Constable. Chief Constable is looking at it operationally. We are in the process of briefing. I spent part of this afternoon with the superintendent who runs Norwich, given that Norwich is the most likely place where things will happen. And we actually went and stood outside the forum and actually looked at it on the ground and how it could be dealt with, given everybody else that might be wandering around perfectly innocent in the markets, the forum, and everywhere else in that part of Norwich. Is that reassuring? I hope it is.
Yeah, and I mean that's obviously going to take more policing on your part as well. So, you know, the hours you're saving one place is going to be taken up somewhere else.
Yeah, potentially. Yeah.
One of the areas that I have fed in is that I am very wary if there is a major problem breaks out, let's say in London, of surrounding counties being asked to provide lots of officers for mutual support. Because if we send all our public, what they call them, PS, public support units, the public order units, we have a mandate to keep 9 in being. If I send all of those to the Met, because they've got a major demonstration outside the Israeli embassy in London, let's say, and something kicks off in the markets area of Norwich, I don't have any means of responding. And one of the problems is that with the way policing is set up, the assumption has been that we would only have one big problem at a time. And therefore we could, as we did, for example, when the Queen died and for the coronation, we could send large numbers of officers to the Met as mutual aid, while also covering the base in Norfolk, because that would be routine policing. Where it becomes more difficult is if we're doing abnormal policing everywhere across the country, and therefore perhaps mutual aid should not be such an immediate resort.
And just to pick up on what you were saying earlier, Maria, the PCC's office has a group which draws together the police, the district councils, the county council, and other agencies that look at issues around preventing radicalisation and people who look to exploit these sorts of situations. And just yesterday had some resources come in that I will be circulating, some advice to communities about things they can do to support the police, I suppose, to perhaps head off some of the not necessarily the immediate threats, but some of the sort of more midterm threats over radicalisation of some people and in some of the detrimental behaviour that can result out of that. So that, you know, people are aware and working on this, and we just have to hope that it doesn't spill over into our communities.
Absolutely.
It's a worrying time, and yeah, contingencies are being developed at pace.
Thank you.
Right. Any more for any more? Okay. All that just is left is for me to say thank you very much for you all for attending tonight. Thank you very much, Giles, for coming along and giving us your thoughts, and thanks to Faye for helping to set this up and for providing the links. And as I said, this has been recorded. I will be posting it on our YouTube channel. There is some supporting information to go with the consultation that was sent out to me by the PCC's office, which I've already shared via a newsletter, but I will post that again on the website, linked to this webinar, to the section that deals with webinars on the website, and to the YouTube channel, so you can pick up some background information. And I would say go and look at the PCC's website. There's lots of good information there that explains some of the thinking and explain some of the issues that are being faced, and use the link and encourage other people to use the link to make your feelings known, and to give Giles some help in trying to leverage some extra funding out of the Treasury, and two, in trying to make some very difficult decisions. So thank you all very much, and I will stop the recording now, and hope you all enjoy the rest of your evening.
Really grateful. Many thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Many thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.